Episode 52, November to December 1914. I fought at Ypres from the sky. Story of the first ground strafing. By Lieutenant Colonel L.A. Strange, DSO, MC, DFC. Read by Robin Sanderson. While the infantry were fighting heartbreaking battles on sodden fields, the pioneer airmen of the Royal Flying Corps were seeking high adventure in the clouds. The personal story of Colonel Strange, who saw the first Battle of Ypres from the air and who was using unfamiliar weapons, ventured forth to seek combat with the courageous enemy, is one of the epic narratives of the Great War. Colonel Strange was one of the first airmen to employ a Lewis gun from the air against troops on the ground. When I was high up in the late evening, with a sun that still gave a little warmth, and burnished the machine with red and golden lights, it was a curious spectacle to look down on the grey, misty dusk stealing across the countryside, and then see it lit up with flashes from the guns on either side that fired 1, 2, 3, 4 in their battery groups. Shell flashes came in the same order in groups or arrived all together in continuous succession on some benighted spot that had given itself away as a target too good to be missed. Then there was the glare from corn ricks, farm buildings and whole villages, which burnt fiercely while the smoke of the battle drifted lazily away to the northeast. This was my first aerial impression of the fighting that took place when Rawlinson's 4th Corps and the heroic remnants of the Belgian army retreated by day and night, until at last they came to rest on the left wing of the British Expeditionary Force, which was located somewhere between Ypres and the sea. Meanwhile, the centre and right were hotly engaged around Belle-Île and later at Armentières, and on a line past Luce and down towards the mining area of Béthune. Very soon the general lines of trenches were formed, which were to last for the rest of the war, and put an end to any form of strategic manoeuvre on a large scale for a very long time. As I felt that my 80 miles an hour gave me the speed of most German machines, I decided that my Avro could easily manage a Lewis gun, provided that she was not required to climb to greater heights than 7,000 feet. Having duly obtained permission from my commanding officer, I affixed the gun satisfactorily to my Avro No. 383 with the help of Captain Pen Gaskell. The mounting consisted of a metal tube, which I carefully selected from the tail boom of a wrecked Henry Farman. The gun lay on top of the fuselage decking, while a piece of rope lashed around its centre of balance was passed up over the metal tube and fixed to the cross member of the front seat tank bearer. For it must be remembered that in those days the front seat was on top of the petrol tank. A pulley on the rope enabled the observer to sling the gun up into mid-air and fire it all round, as well as back over the pilot's head, with the aid of a stock from the shoulder. It cost us some trouble to get the gun mounted when the job was finished. Of course, the weather broke, with the result that we had to fight our way day after day through clouds and rain, and soon began to realize how much our work was likely to be handicapped by the prevailing westerly winds. Under these conditions, there was little chance of finding a German machine on which to try our gun. After moving up to an advanced landing ground at Hazebrouck, No. 5 Squadron settled down at Belle-Île Aerodrome on October the 21st, from which I one day managed to get near an albatross when I was up with Lieutenant Abercrombie as passenger. Unfortunately, the gun jammed after a few rounds, and those who knew the 2 men out there, how many of them are left I wonder, can easily imagine the lecture delivered to Abercrombie by Pen Gaskell, who was our Lewis gun expert. So, on Abercrombie's advice, I took Pen Gaskell up to use his bally old gun himself the very next day. There being no Huns about, Pen Gaskell assumed command. He turned and yelled himself hoarse in his efforts to make me understand I was only the driver of the Lewis gun's carriage, i.e. the Avro, while he was the battery commander, and as such he intended to bring the gun into action against a train and troops down below and Parichy sidings. As he was senior to me, I had to obey orders and go down, with the result that we had quite a nice little bit of what was probably the first ground strafing. This was an easy game at the time, because there was no danger of interference from above. I cannot understand why it was not done more extensively, as it was our only way of helping the hard-pressed troops who were then fighting the First Battle of Ypres. Later on, it was not so popular when German machines became more aggressive. Consequently, it died out and was reintroduced later as a supposed innovation. But for a while we had a monopoly of it. The Lewis gun we carried made my observer's seat a popular one in the squadron. On October 30, when Lieutenant Thompson was my observer, we were within an inch of forcing a German machine to land. But at the critical moment, an inlet valve broke, and we had great difficulty in getting home again. Another time, when I was out with Lieutenant Rabagliati, we were diving on a German machine when we saw a kite balloon on the ground and shot it up. I also remember an occasion when Captain Cartwright and I hung above a German airdrome at Ypres for nearly an hour in the hope of seeing a machine come up. At length we grew tired of waiting and dived down to see what damage we could do to the aerodrome. We got peppered so badly that we returned home with 23 bullet holes in our machine. The seat tank was shot through and Cartwright had a bullet in his coat, but I think we were lucky to get off without further damage. This little excursion gave Avro number 568 a 60th bullet hole. I thought she had received quite her fair share of punctures, but of course, being unable to read the future, I had no knowledge of a certain day ahead when she was to stagger home with her pilot and observer slightly wounded and more than 60 holes put in her in one flight. I venture to think that the extracts from my diary may be interesting, as giving some notion of what happened when we met enemy aircraft in those early days, and showing how the westerly winds helped the Germans to slip back over their lines when pursued by the British. November the 1st, 7 a.m., repaired engine and flew to Bellieu, 25 minutes. 10 a.m., chased a German machine for 40 minutes and fired 50 rounds from a Maxim. Buddy went down over his own lines, apparently undamaged. 11:30 a.m., started flight of 35 minutes duration. Dropped 25 bombs on bivouac around Q and Lille, and 18 on a kite balloon, which went down, although we did not actually hit it. 2 p.m., reconnaissance around Ypres, Roulers, Coutray, Ménines, and back to Bellieu. Dropped 11 bombs on bivouacs. This makes a record of 36 in one day. Also, I made a record of my longest time in the air for a day, 5 hours and 15 minutes altogether. Lieutenant Vaughan wounded. November the 2nd, 8 a.m., reconnaissance, as passenger in Lieutenant Creed's machine, observing for 1 hour 10 minutes around Quesnoy, Messines, etc. 12 noon, up again, observing over battle in process between Ypres and Armentières. This line is now an extraordinary sight, as the trenches are very close to one another, and the ground all round them is pitted with shell holes. November the 3rd, 9 a.m., chased a German machine for 20 minutes. 11:40 a.m., reconnaissance round Béthune and Lille. Drove a machine down at Lille. I dropped 22 bombs on ammunition columns at Renades in course of a 1 hour 45 minutes flight. November the 4th, dull misty day. Due attention paid to machine. November the 5th, 10 a.m., reconnaissance with Lieutenant Wilson round Messines for 1 hour 35 minutes flight. 2 p.m., flew for 1 hour 55 minutes after German machine and drove it down at Lille, where I dropped 9 bombs on the aerodrome. Fired 50 rounds from a Maxim at a balloon, dropped 5 bombs at Doulemont, and got a very close burst from anti-aircraft guns. November 6th, thick mist all day, no flying. November 7th, thick mist early, but 12 noon, reconnaissance round Lille, QM and Ypres. In the course of a 2-hour, 5-minute flight, dropped 10 bombs on cavalry bivouac. The shooting of the German archers seemed to be improving daily, and we got some very close ones. November 8th, 12:15 p.m. Long reconnaissance from Beaulieu to La Bassée, Roulers, Thourou, Courtrai, Roubaix, and Armentières with Captain Cartwright. The district comprising Courtrai, Roubaix, Quesnoy, and Ménines seems very full of troops, especially cavalry. The latter camps show up more clearly on account of the rings the horses make when they are exercised. I find it pays to do a sharp left or right-hand bank turn when under shell fire, as you gain a few clear minutes before the gunners get onto you again, and every minute counts when it's a question of getting out of the range of a particular gun. The Germans seem to get more and more anti-aircraft guns. The more you get used to being shelled, the more they shell you. I think I must have seen a good 2,000 or 3,000 shells burst at our machines in the air today, and I reckon that at least 50 of them were fired at me. November 10th, raining, misty day, clouds too low, no flying. Heard that the Germans attacked Ypres, but were repulsed. November 11th, cloudy, wet day. On November the 22nd, I started a reconnaissance one morning at 7:30 a.m. with Lieutenant Small as my observer, and, after we had dropped some 15 bombs on promising targets around Lille, Quesnoy, Aubert, and other places, we climbed to 7,500 feet over Armentières, as we thought we had spotted a German machine heading from the east towards Beaulieu. As it approached to full throttle, we made it out to be a brand new aviatique. It was flying at 7,000 feet, and there was a strong east wind blowing, which meant that he would find great difficulty in getting home if we pounced on him at the right moment. Altogether things looked very rosy, provided the Lewis gun did its bit. I turned in front of the aviatique, and at about 200 feet above it, signalling to Small to hold his fire until I was ready. As we waited a little further while before attacking, so as to get further in front of our quarry, it so happened that we were bang over our own airdrome when the right moment came. The stage could not have been better set. I turned half left, kept my eye on the aviatique, and dived across his front, just as hard as I could drive my old Avro. When I was in position, I nodded to Small, who replied with a good long burst from the Lewis gun. All my faculties were alert. By keeping my eyes fixed on the aviatique's left top aileron, I managed to maintain my position and correct distance. After a second burst, I came up closer, being then about 50 feet below the enemy. But the German pilot must have gone into a slight turn without banking, for I suddenly saw his observer lean out, fire a clip of cartridges from his Loeber pistol. Then the aviatique slipped across, and a few moments later the observer was potting at me from the other side. Small was changing a drum at the time. I saw a look of surprise and pain come over his face, and then noticed that his glove was covered with blood. All the same, Freddie Small worked feverishly at his drum, and was ready to open fire again as soon as I had manoeuvred the Avro into position. He had shot away about half another drum when suddenly the aviatique pulled up, stalled, and side-slipped away at a vertical angle. I was desperately afraid he was going to escape me, but I dived ahead, and both machines went down at a terrific speed. The Hun observer was firing off very lights all the time he dropped, and, as his own trenches and ours were not far off, I had to hustle ahead of him to cut him off from his own lines. I just managed to head him off, but he doubled back to the left, and for a moment I thought he was bound to crash in some reserve trenches. We went down to 500 feet at the time, but only a mile from the front line. I dived ahead again. The aviatique flattened out to land, and I cursed fiercely when I thought that I had lost him. A stream of black exhaust came out from his Mercedes engine, and it looked as if he was just going to streak over the trenches a few feet above the ground, though with a last effort I shot in front of him again. Down went the aviatique's nose. It flattened out over a hedge and made a bumpy landing in a ploughed field just behind a wood where the Cornwalls and Devons occupied some reserve trenches. I knew they would do their fair share of the business, and as it was too close to the firing line for me to land, and I had a wounded observer to get home, I headed full speed for Belle-Île. My last view of the aviotech showed me its observer standing over the pilot, whom I judged to have been wounded, while our troops were running towards the pair of them. As soon as I had seen Small in the right hands, I dashed off on a motorcycle to see what had happened to the aviotech. When I arrived at the scene of its capture, I found it undamaged except for some 20 bullet holes, 2 of which were in the instrument board. Having rescued some instruments and arms, which the Cornwalls had removed from the machine, I listened to the tale of the landing. The observer, who was a Prussian Guard officer, could not understand why his pilot, an NCO, had landed where he did, because the engine was good enough to take the machine over the last hedge. They would have had a good chance of escape if they had made just the extra bit before landing, and the officer thought his pilot must have come down because he was wounded. When he found him uninjured, his rage knew no bounds. He broke away from his captors, knocked the pilot down, and kicked him unmercifully. At last he was overpowered, whereupon he begged the officer in charge of the Cornwalls detachment, who captured him, to be allowed to report the matter to the German flying headquarters. I am afraid this request was not granted, and after all, the pilot had received quite enough punishment for his lack of pluck. The men in the German trenches had seen the fight in the air, and as soon as they realized their machine was captured, they must have sent back word to their artillery, for they shelled us heavily when we tried to bring the aviotech back. We managed to bring it along somehow, and that evening we had a grand party in the mess to celebrate its capture. It was subsequently patched up and flown by our fellows on sundry unlawful occasions, before being sent off across the Channel.
His loot and a fix upon his shoulder, the right hand